Standing out in a crowd, can Abdul El-Sayed create his own space in the race for Michigan's Senate seat? Michigan's Grow operation, a first-of-its-kind job at the state level, looks to boost Michigan's population and economy. But is the state's chief growth officer getting the job done? This is Flashpoint.
Happy Mother's Day, everybody. I'm Jason Colthorpe. Did you know Michigan has a chief growth officer? The position was created by Governor Gretchen Whitmer in June of 2023, and the job title is pretty self-explanatory. The goal is to grow the state's population, economy, and reputation as the best place to live, work, and start a business. Most of us fully believe our state is the best, but beyond our biases are statistics that don't tell the same story. True, Michigan's population has grown over the last few years, but not by as much as other states. The state's GDP has grown by 2% over the last couple of years, but personal income is down and unemployment is up. This morning, we're going to talk to Hillary Doe about the results she's seen thus far and what needs to be done going forward to justify such a position. But first, let's talk to the most recent candidate to enter the Michigan Senate race. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed ran for governor 8 years ago, finishing second to Gretchen Whitmer in the primary. He's again facing a primary with a presumptive frontrunner. How does he plan to stand out? What does he consider the biggest issue to be for Michigan and America? Well, let's ask him right now on Flashpoint. And let's say good morning to Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who is the latest candidate for Michigan Senate. Good morning. First of all, why Senate? I know you ran for governor 8 years ago. Why Senate this time?
Yeah, look, it just shouldn't be this hard in the richest, most powerful country in the world to do basic things, to afford your groceries, to go see a doctor without being worried about whether or not you're going to fall into medical debt, to take a big, deep breath of air without knowing that the stuff that comes out of smokestacks is getting into your or your baby's lungs, to send your kid to a school that you know is empowering their future. And these things have become way too hard in the richest, most powerful country in the world, and that's caused a lot of pain. And the people who have exploited that pain to come to power are just making it worse. You look at what Donald Trump and his friends Elon Musk and the folks who just rolled over in Congress, what they're doing, they're deconstructing the parts of government we actually like cancer research. I think all of us should be able to agree that cancer is a bipartisan issue. You look at the way that he's destroyed the global economy so he could pass a stock tips to his buddies. You look at the way he's trying to now come for a program like Medicaid. These are the challenges that I think we are all suffering with, and Americans across this country, Michiganders in particular, they're struggling with them. And I think if we're serious about taking them on, we need somebody who can both stand up to Trump and Musk and all they're doing, but we also need somebody who knows how to build. I'm somebody who's served at the city and the county level. I've rebuilt the health department. I restructured another one. We've done things like eliminate $700 million in medical debt, put Narcan, a life-saving opioid reversal medication, in over 100 different locations across the county, put glasses on kids' faces. So you need somebody who can both stand up and fight back against Donald Trump, but also knows how to build after he is done.
It sounds clearly like you want to make health care a primary issue that matters, and that is a huge issue for both Michigan and America. But what do you want to do? Do you want to revamp Obamacare? How do you want to rebuild that, as you say?
It's a crazy thing to me that in the richest, most powerful country in the world, that you can't know that you can go see a doctor and not worry about the bill that comes afterwards. We should be guaranteeing access to accessible, affordable health care. Now, when I say that, I know some people are saying,
so you throw out Obamacare altogether?
It's not that you throw out, it's that you evolve, you continue to go forward, right? The idea that Obamacare was the end of things, you ask anybody out there right now in the country and ask them, do you feel well taken care of? Do you feel sure about your insurance? And almost everybody will tell you no. Like, you think about your paycheck. It gets garnished every 2 weeks to 4 weeks, so you can have access to insurance, so that you have the ability, right, to pay a deductible afterwards. You literally have to pay again for the thing you thought you already paid for. So no matter who you are in the system, unless of course you're over 65 on Medicare, right, you are getting nickeled and dimed by a system that is more focused on figuring out how to make payments than to take care of patients. And I believe that as a physician, as somebody who's worked in health and healthcare my whole life, that we can have so much better. The reality of it, though, is that we have to get past a system that tells us that making money is the primary concern of healthcare rather than taking care of people who are sick.
Getting past it, as you say, or tweaking it, building on it, how do you pay for that?
Yeah. Well, look, we already pay for that. I want you to think about this. We pay 1 in every $5 paid in our entire economy, the whole GDP, is paid for healthcare. We already pay for that. Don't worry about that. If you go across the river, for example, they pay almost about half of what we pay, right? A little bit more than half of what we pay. They live 2 years longer, and by and large, they're happier with their system. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to do exactly what they do. I think if, for example, you work for a union or your employer gives you quality private health insurance, you should be able to keep that. But if your factory closes down, if you lose your job, you shouldn't be kicked out in the dust having to worry about COBRA or something else, going without health insurance at all. We can have that here. And so the way we pay for it is, rather than having our pay garnished every 2 weeks to 4 weeks to have to pay extra to actually get the health care that we want, right, that we would be able to pay into our collective system. Everybody gets insured. You can have that extra if you want it, right, but you don't have to rely on it, and you are free then to go out and live your life without worrying about what might happen, financial calamity, if you get sick.
You mentioned Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Talk to me about the cuts that are being made. Do you think, well, let me say it this way. Do you think there are cuts to be made in the federal government? And maybe you disagree with how they're being done, but what about the waste, the overspending that's happening? Do you think that can be cut out of federal government?
Anybody who's worked in government will tell you that sometimes it's not as efficient as you want.
Sure.
But anybody who's worked anywhere will tell you that sometimes it's not as efficient as you might want. And this idea that somehow government is categorically less efficient than the private sector doesn't really make sense to me. So you have to understand the game here. What they tend to do is they make huge cuts in government, and then they point to government when it's not working because of what they cut out, and they say, look how inefficient this is, only so that they can privatize out government services. That is the ballgame. That is what the playbook has been for a very long time. This is just the newest iteration of it. So yes, are there places where we could be more efficient in government? Absolutely. But that's not cancer research, right? That's not Social Security Administration. That's not the people who make sure that old folks across our communities, right, get their Social Security checks, right? Those are folks who come to work every single day, making sure that the folks they take care of, the people who sit downstream of government decisions, get the things that they need from government. And so what we're seeing here is a wholesale whacking, right, destruction of government in the name of quote unquote waste, fraud, and abuse. And I worry that what's going to happen is the worst kind of waste, fraud, and abuse when they go out and then identify, right, private entities that they're going to contract a lot of these services out. So all of us have to be very wary when billionaires tell you, right, that they can make government work better for you. Because what usually happens is they cut the things that work for all the rest of us who are not billionaires, and then they privatize the rest of it out to their billionaire buddies who then make a buck doing the service worse.
And there have been cuts at CDC, NIH, and as a medical doctor, what do you think about what RFK Jr. is doing as the head of Health and Human Services? Is he doing anything that you agree with, anything you disagree with?
So the thing about RFK Jr. is that he identifies the right problem and then has completely the wrong solution, right? So his point about ultra-processed foods is right. We have corporations in this country that make huge amounts of money ultra-processing food, so that's hyper-palatable, so we eat more of it so they can sell us more of it, right? It leaves us less healthy, less happy, less together, right? That is a problem. But the approach that he's got to actually solving it, that's not working. Because if you're serious about actually solving that problem, you have to start with legislation, right? Because right now in our system, we subsidize a lot of the worst kinds of foods, right? We empower a lot of these huge corporations. If you were serious, you would start there. The problem, though, is that the scientist who actually discovered the impact of ultra-processed food, he literally just left the NIH because of censorship from RFK Jr. And so to me, if you're serious, you identify the problem, and then you do the science, right, to understand how to solve it, and then move that forward. He is trying to put his own prerogatives ahead of the science.
I want to ask you about tariffs as well. How do you think tariffs are right, and especially in regard of how they affect Michigan?
Let me explain the way tariffs work here, right? NAFTA has been a disaster for Michigan towns all across this state, right? It has created a situation where we're watching as literally people's dreams have been robbed, as towns have been destroyed. So how do you address the cancer of NAFTA? Tariffs could be a helpful chemotherapy strategy, but any doctor who's ever seen a patient on chemo or given chemo will tell you that if you give the patient all the chemo at once, you're going to kill the patient, right? Because chemo is a form of poison, but it just poisons the tumor, the cancer, faster than it poisons the patient. So you got to be very careful, you got to be very thoughtful. So do I think tariffs could be a helpful tool to address the cancer of NAFTA and trade? Yes. Do I think that doing it this way makes sense? Absolutely not. Now let me explain why Trump did it this way. Trump, whenever he does anything, it's always ham-fisted, it's always self-serving, right? And it is always chaotic. And his goal was not necessarily to actually solve the problem. His goal was to bring a bunch of corporate CEOs to heel so they came to him, right, so that they could trade with him and he could have power over them to get some relief from this version of tariffs. And that's exactly what happened. So now you've got small businesses being shut down because of the tariffs, but you've got huge corporations like Microsoft and Apple who are getting a pass. Now, what did they trade for that? I don't know, but I'd like to understand.
Yeah. Let me quickly touch on the Democratic Party, which you would be joining. It feels like you're more aligned with a Bernie Sanders than a Chuck Schumer, and I believe Bernie Sanders actually endorsed you. There's talk from the National Democratic Party. They want the party to go even further left. That's how they connect with Middle America. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm grateful for the endorsement of Senator Sanders, and let me explain why. This is a guy who's been fighting for an economy that works for working people, guaranteeing people health care, protecting our air, water, and soil. And I'm grateful that he sees in this campaign an opportunity to support somebody who agrees with him on that. I don't know when we came up with this model of left versus right, but I'm more interested in how do we make sure our public policy works for working people, right? And I think the real difference in our politics today isn't left versus right. I think it's people who have to actually show up to work tomorrow and people who don't. And right now, I think that the Democratic Party needs to go back to its original ideals. I don't know when this party became the party that's more interested in getting corporate donor checks than it is in working for the fortunes of the 350 million people of us rather than the Fortune 500. I don't know when this party stopped believing in guaranteeing health care for everybody, but I believe that we should get back to that. I don't know when the party became the party that supports war abroad, right? But I think we should be the party that is more focused on peace, particularly when it comes to the idea of the fact that our kids' schools, if you look at them, right, how much could $1 million, $2 million mean for those schools? And instead, we're shipping our money abroad to a foreign military, dropping bombs on other kids in their schools. I think it's wrong. I think the party needs to find itself again. And if we do, I think we win elections and we get to take America and heal America again.
Well, if you win, you'll have some pushing back to do, it sounds like. Dr. El-Sayed, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it and good luck.
Appreciate you.
We're coming right back on Flashpoint. Stay with us. Welcome back to Flashpoint, everybody. Let's say good morning to Michigan's Chief Growth Officer, Hillary Doe. Welcome back to Flashpoint.
Thank you so much for having me.
Talk to me about the job for anybody who hasn't gotten a chance to understand what it is. Does your job work kind of in conjunction with the governor's agenda, or are you off on your own doing your thing?
Yeah, so the governor created this role in end of May, beginning of June of 2023 with the task of really reversing our population growth trends. And we've done whatever it takes to do exactly that since then. So the state's really running now the most ambitious talent retention and attraction effort in the country at this point.
A question I ask almost every candidate: how do you attract and retain talent? And I got to think that's got to be right in your wheelhouse with what you're trying to do. And I know you do have a new initiative about that. How's that going?
Yeah, it's been going really, really well. So far to date, over the last about 18 months, we've engaged 20,000 plus Michiganders in this effort to build an agenda to really grow our state. And we've worked on everything from ensuring that we have great childcare access for Michiganders to things that we've seen pass over the last year and a half plus, like an innovation fund for Michigan's entrepreneurs and startups to help grow our economy, to better access pre-K for all 4-year-olds in our state, because we saw that our comparative faster growing peer states had better post-secondary outcomes. So we really have a great sense, I think, now of what it's going to take to make sure that we're growing our state. And now we're in the process of really implementing new pilots and programs like the one you just alluded to help kickstart growth across Michigan.
That's Make My Home,
yes,
correct?
That's Make My Home.
How does that work? Explain how people might see that coming to fruition.
Yeah, so Make My Home just started in the fall, and we just launched a second round right now. So folks will hear about the winners here in the next month. We're going to announce them. And communities across our state can apply, letting us know who they really need to retain or attract, as specific as teachers to as general as, retaining, for example, recent college grads, and then something they'd like to try to help keep them here. So our support is helping them offer down payments, student loan forgiveness, all kinds of different program benefits to keep them right here in our state.
You just mentioned some statistics. I know the population has grown a little bit.
Yep.
You recognize that statistics in comparison to our neighboring states and peer areas, not as much as others. When you look at what's still not growing, some job growth numbers, unemployment is up. We've lost thousands of manufacturing jobs. When you see progress in one area but still losing ground in others, how does that change what you're doing?
Yeah, so we're always evaluating, the entire economy in order to make sure that we have a long-term plan for Michigan's growth. What I'd say is actually that I have some real optimism right now. The latest studies say that Michigan is actually in the top 5 in terms of the acceleration of our young adult population. That means we fundamentally changed the shape of the curve.
Which goes to the retaining talent.
Exactly, and so we can see real growth there. 65% of Michigan counties grew last year. And we've also seen some real growth, for example, in key sectors like clean energy. We have the fastest growing clean energy job sector in America, and other fast growing sectors like defense and aerospace. So real diversification in our economy.
How does Detroit play a role in the master plan of that? Because Detroit's one of those places where educational attainment that you mentioned and the GDP and all those growth issues are a little bit less than the state as a whole.
Yeah, there's 3 parts. Michigan won't grow unless Detroit grows.
Yeah.
We know that's of critical importance. It did last year. That was critical. We need to implement those policy solutions, our blueprint for growth. We need to implement these kinds of pilots and programs to kickstart growth, and we need to tell our story. We launched a marketing campaign over the last 18 months. So far, 35,000 people have come through it saying yes, they want to live and work in Michigan, and we're just getting started.
Is that, I don't know if that's the kind of the survey you were talking about that you kind of put out in the field. When you do that, when you reach out to people and ask what they want, what they're looking for, what are some of the things specifically you hear that they like about Michigan?
Yeah.
What do they say is driving them away?
Yeah, so we did do a survey in our state, and we actually did a survey of 6,000 young people across the country as well, asking what they're looking for in a place to call home. What we learned is that our young folks really care about transit, for example, and the most motivating factor for them in a place to call home is housing. Availability of housing, affordable housing, and the ability to someday own a home. When you control for parents and young families, what they really wanted access to was affordable childcare and pre-K solutions, which is why you've seen some of the policy solutions I mentioned passed recently come to the top of the list. When folks choose to leave the state, we know that they're looking for opportunities. We know that they're looking for great educational and job opportunities, and that's why we're making real investments in some of the industry growth I was just mentioning.
And Metro Detroit is lacking in the affordable housing and the transit, and I've talked to kind of the county executives, and those seem to be areas, at least the transit area, where they're just at a stalemate. Is that something that you try and fight for, or drop hints like, hey, this could really be a game changer for the state if they can get something done?
We do. We talk about transit all the time, and we've seen some progress. Things like the DAX, for example, to allow us to get some airport transit isn't a small thing, actually, because it's a first impression when folks come to the region. And we're seeing that folks in Lansing are now talking about investment in transit in a big way for, the first time in a long time. So I think that's really encouraging and should be encouraging to our young people.
I was very happy to see the DAX at the airport when I came back a week ago, even though it blocked me, and I was like, this is a good thing. Talk to me about roads. I know MITA has a new program out right now compensating drivers and things, but when it comes to our infrastructure, how does that play the role in when people, because you hear people always say, why do I cross the state line and Ohio has better roads? Are we driving people away because of our infrastructure?
People do mention infrastructure. Michiganders cited infrastructure as one of the things they really wanted us to invest in our communities in order to, increase their happiness staying here in our state. That includes everything from investing in our roads, but also it does include things like housing, for example, and their public transit options. So I think we really need comprehensive solutions in order to make sure long-term we're retaining our talent and attracting folks to come and join us here in our state.
The U.S. News just put out a survey that had Michigan 43rd amongst all the states, and that was actually down a spot. But within that, it breaks it down to certain categories, and one of them was opportunity was kind of the best, and that felt like your area. But when you see a ranking like that, Does it weigh on you at all and just think we've got to work harder? What does it mean?
You know, I look at all of them, and it's interesting, right, depending on the scale. In some rankings, we're top 5, and in others, you know, we're somewhere else. But I'm always tracking what the progress looks like. What's the trend year over year? I think that's most important to me, because that's what matters to Michiganders. Are things getting better over time? And I think that they really, really are. You know, on moving company ratings, for example, we're seeing Michigan climb the ranks every year. More people moving in, fewer moving out. We're seeing, you know, from a census data perspective, improvements every year for the last couple years. Like I said, counties are growing, our young adult population accelerating. So I think we have a lot to really be proud of and hang on to. Michiganders should celebrate that and share our story and be our brand ambassadors. And we should acknowledge the places we need to get better, because only when we do that will we actually accomplish them. So both things are true.
Well, we certainly know as Michiganders that everyone's rooting for you for the job that it entails in attracting more people for sure and pushing the state forward.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hillary, thanks. Yeah, it's great to talk to you. Hillary Doe, Michigan's Chief Growth Officer. We'll finish up this edition of Flashpoint right after this. All right, 4 things before we go this morning. Did you see the white smoke emerge from above the Sistine Chapel this week in Vatican City? Well, maybe it's because I read Dan Brown's Angels and Demons and just watched the movie Conclave, but I can't help but be fascinated by the centuries-old proceedings that determine who becomes the next pope. Really, it's because very few things in this world anymore are still that rich in tradition and surrounded with such secrecy. So, in honor of the newly elected Pope Leo XIV, 4 of the most momentous conclaves in history. How about the one that gave us all of the modern conclave rules? The year was 1268 AD, and this conclave would last 3 years because the cardinals couldn't make a decision. 3 cardinals actually died before it was over, and church officials finally locked away the cardinals to force them to make a decision. Well, when that didn't work, they took away their food and even removed the roof so they'd be exposed to the weather. Finally, Pope Gregory X was elected. Now, in 1334, there was a clear favorite to the papacy, but surprised everyone when that favorite said he would remain in his home country of France if he was elected. So, kind of as a protest, the cardinals voted for the person they thought had the longest shot to become pontiff. Yeah, a 2/3 majority accidentally voted for a cardinal named Jacques Fournier, and he became Pope Benedict XII. Oops. All right, in 1605, a fist fight actually broke out during the election process because things got so heated in that one. One cardinal even suffered several broken bones in the fight that was so vicious it could be heard outside the walls. Eventually, Pope Paul V was anointed. And finally, do you remember what happened just 12 years ago when Pope Francis was elected? A fake cardinal crashed the conclave. He snuck into the proceedings by pretending to be from a fictitious Italian church. Finally, the Swiss Guard noticed his outfit wasn't quite right, and he was escorted out. Just imagine if he'd gotten a vote in that one. As always, you can send us an email if you have thoughts about the show at flashpoint@clickondetroit.com, and that includes any question you'd like asked of the candidates, and we have a lot of them coming up on the program. Remember, treat all the moms out there like the queens they are today. They deserve it. I'm Jason Coulthorpe, everybody. We'll see you later.